What happens when trust is broken and secrets come to light? David faces a choice that will change his life forever. Stay tuned to see what he does next. Let's dive in. I learned a hard lesson about how easily an average man's daily life can turn into a real mess. When the events in this story began a few years ago, my family consisted of my wife, Laura, 39, and me, David Johnson, 41, along with our children, Anna, 11, and Sam, 8. Though we weren't the happiest family in our Chicago neighborhood, we managed to keep it together, probably because we believed it was best for our children. Everything began when I met my old classmate from high school, Mike Brown, one Thursday afternoon after work at the liquor store. I hadn't seen him in a couple of years, and since the store was quite crowded that day, we had plenty of time to chat. To our surprise, we discovered that Mike's wife, Rachel, was working at the same office where Laura had been for the last 6 months. He asked me, "I didn't see you at our wives' Christmas party, but are you coming to their company's farewell party for the owner?" I told him I'd like to come but wasn't invited. Mike looked surprised and said, "Of course you're invited. All spouses are invited. Why wouldn't you be? I'll ask Rachel, and you can be sure about that. See you there, old friend." The reason for the big company party, just 2 months after the Christmas party, was that the old owners had sold their shares to a national investment company and wanted to thank all their employees before the new owners took over on April 1st. Of course, I remembered the Christmas party. It was Laura's first Christmas party at that new job, and she had told me she was sorry, but I wasn't invited. She had bought a stunning new dress for the party and came back home at 3 a.m., tipsy and slightly disheveled. After some arguing, I told her that I believed what she had told me about the party and the nightcap afterward at a friend's place. She cried and promised me that nothing had happened between her and any man. Of course, I had serious doubts about her story, but what could I do without any evidence? Back home from my shopping, I immediately told Laura that I had met my old friend Mike Brown at the liquor store and that he mentioned his wife working at the same company as her. Laura looked concerned as she replied, "What's her name?" "Rachel. Do you know her?" "No, I don't," she replied. I continued, "But Mike told me that all spouses were invited to your Christmas party. So who the hell pretended to be your spouse at that party? And where did you spend the night?" She looked pale as she answered, "I've told you several times that I thought spouses were not invited. I was new there and didn't understand the invitation. So you were the only one in the company who couldn't understand a simple invitation. I promise I'll find out who was with you after the party, and you can be sure they'll regret it when I do." She began to cry, sobbing. "I've told you many times that we were just a small group at someone's house. Only a few drinks and some dancing, no reason for you to be mad and jealous." There were too many weak points in her story, but I couldn't go any further without evidence. So I asked her, "Am I invited and booked for the next company party?" Once again, I noticed a strange expression on her face because she hadn't mentioned anything about that party to me. But now she knew that I knew all spouses were invited, and she replied, "Of course, I've booked both of us for the party, but I forgot to tell you." I had serious doubts about Laura telling me the truth. No need to say that our marriage was on very shaky ground, and any thoughts about intimacy between us seemed pointless at that moment. Then things got worse again the following Friday after lunch when I had taken a few hours off from work to run some errands. Laura usually left her job at 2 p.m. on Fridays, so both of us were at home when the phone rang. I took the call and could hear that the caller was in a car with some background music playing, but he or she hung up without saying anything. Laura asked me, "Who was it?" I told her, "Your lover," but he hung up when he heard me answer. My reply was meant as an innocent joke, but I couldn't avoid noticing how she froze for a second before she began shouting, "You're totally weird! What the hell are you thinking about me?" "It was just a joke," I said. "But now, after your overreaction, I don't know what to think. Was I right?" She calmed down and replied softly, "No, you weren't right. It was just one of your jealous jokes, but I'm sorry for losing my temper. I had a terrible day at work today, but that's no excuse. I hope it explains my bad mood." That evening, Laura chose to wear a much more conservative dress than before, and was far from cheerful when we headed to the party. The event was held at the Lakeview Hotel, where dinner was served at several round tables instead of the usual long ones. We were seated with 4 other couples, and I got the impression that Laura knew all the other women at our table. I couldn't help but feel that Laura regarded my presence as a nuisance, something that canceled her plans for an enjoyable evening. After the meal, when we had coffee and a glass of brandy, her boss came to our table for a little small talk. When he saw me next to Laura, he said, "You must be Laura's husband. We missed you at the Christmas party. Sorry you couldn't come." I replied, "I wasn't invited to that party, or at least that's what Laura told me." He looked at Laura and asked, "All spouses were invited. How could you miss that?" I told him, "She came home very late and in a terrible state, so I'm sure she preferred someone from the office instead of me." Some of the other couples couldn't resist laughing, and Laura turned bright red. Her boss seemed slightly uncomfortable and said, "I didn't know anything about that," before he left our table. "You ought to know," I replied. "There are over 200 employees in all your offices." Laura began to cry, and I'm sure the other couples found the situation awkward because they all excused themselves to go to the restrooms. Even I went to the restroom, where I talked for a few minutes with one of the other spouses at our table. He told me that he and his wife had been seated near Laura at the Christmas party, and she had spent the whole evening very close to one of her male co-workers. He remembered my wife because his wife had mentioned Laura's unusual last name. I had never expected anything like this to happen to me, but I knew that many naive men before me had learned the painful truth about a cheating spouse by some kind of accident. It hit me like a punch in the gut. Of course, I had noticed that the spark between me and my lovely wife had been fading recently, but ups and downs happened in all marriages, so I hadn't worried much about it. I was sure things would brighten up again soon. I didn't see Laura after that, and one of her co-workers told me she had left the party. When she didn't answer her cell phone and the babysitter didn't answer our home phone, I realized that Laura was at home and had sent the babysitter away. I spent some time at the bar, and to my great relief, nobody mentioned Laura. Back home, I found her asleep in our bed. The next day was the worst day during our 13 years as a married couple. Laura shouted and screamed but refused to tell me where she had been after the Christmas party. On Monday morning, Laura went to her job as usual, and to her great relief, nobody at work mentioned how I had humiliated her during the dinner, not even her boss, who obviously regarded it as her private problem. What her co-workers said behind her back was another matter entirely. The next surprise came at bedtime that Friday evening, when Laura initiated some intimate time. She turned out to be more energetic in several positions, which gave both of us great satisfaction. It was a stark contrast to her usual reserved behavior. Of course, I suspected her newfound interest in intimacy might have something to do with my recent comments about a lover. Laura fell asleep immediately after our time together, but I had too many thoughts racing through my head to sleep. The main question was, did she prefer me as a more assertive husband rather than the laid-back guy I had been before? Nothing special happened during the next week, and I got the sense that our marriage was slowly improving again. Then everything collapsed like a house of cards one morning, when I noticed that Laura had dressed a little better than usual and had her hair done. During breakfast, she told me she had forgotten to mention that she might have to work some overtime that day because her boss had mentioned something about it the day before. I didn't see any reason to hold back my thoughts, so I said, "Since when do you need to dress up for overtime? Isn't it better to tell me the truth, that you intend to spend time with your lover again?" That took her by surprise, which was evident on her face before she began shouting, "Have you gone completely mad? You need help with this paranoid behavior. It's better we end this marriage so you can see your lover without hiding behind my back. I may be mad, but I'm not mad enough to stay married to a cheating woman." Laura began to cry, and even our children started crying loudly. I began to wonder, what have I done to my family? I had started the most serious quarrel in our marriage without having any solid evidence of Laura cheating. The only thing I had was a strange feeling that had kept me awake all night. After crying for some time, Laura sobbed, "Do you really want a divorce?" "Yes," I said. "I can't see any other solution. If you intend to ruin this marriage, it's best for both of us to split up as soon as possible so we can move on with our lives. I'm fed up with being treated like this. I've had enough." Laura rushed back to our bedroom, and I felt some remorse for accusing her of cheating without any concrete proof. I understood that I had acted rashly and had done everything wrong. Of course, I should have gone about it differently by collecting evidence first. If I had done that, then I could confront her with solid proof. When Laura returned to the kitchen a few minutes later, she was dressed as usual for an average day. She didn't say anything to me, and I didn't know what to say to her. I began to realize that only a miracle could save our marriage. If Laura was innocent, she could hardly bear the humiliation I had caused her recently. If she were guilty of having an affair, our marriage would be over as soon as I found any evidence. That evening, Laura told me that she had informed her boss that I had refused to let her work overtime, and he had accepted it because he knew me from the party. I should have called her boss to confirm, but I didn't. To my great relief, I got unexpected help from the new owners who had taken over the company where Laura worked. Their IT experts conducted a secret investigation into the use of computers at the office, and found that the average time spent on personal matters was 45 minutes per day for each employee. The worst offender had been online for 15 hours during the week under investigation. The following Monday, the whole staff at Laura's office was called to a meeting, where they were informed about the new rules, which meant that all personal internet use was forbidden to save time and money. The new organization also resulted in the 4 most recently hired people being let go. Laura kept her job, but from now on, she had to use the computer we shared at home for all her emails. Our children had computers, but no access to the internet. I had always been interested in computer programs, and I had a feeling that from now on, we would be playing on my turf. I was ready for that, and had prepared the computer with a mirror program that saved a copy of everything she did. Another program would retrieve anything she deleted. Within a couple of days, Laura activated a new free email account on our computer under the name Bright Sunset, in addition to her old Gmail address, which she used for innocent chats with some of her old friends who had moved out of town. The new account received only a few messages, mostly junk mail, and a few real emails from someone named Happy Traveler. The only messages Laura sent that first week were completely innocent, telling Happy Traveler about her new email account and that she was available online again. Even his first reply, which she deleted, didn't say much. Just, "Great to have my dear friend online again." One thing was sure. Laura was involved in something, and I had high hopes of being able to collect useful information about what it was. Of course, they could use cell phones for most of their communication, especially now that she was limited to using the computer at home and knew I was skilled with computers. But I was sure she would prefer email for longer messages. I decided that Laura would never get half of our assets if she caused our divorce by cheating. I had worked hard to provide a decent standard for my family, and no lover would ever get a share of that. Therefore, I began slowly working on a plan to protect my money. As the sole owner of our house, I could take out a large loan for investments without needing Laura to sign any papers. To my great surprise, the bank agreed to give me everything I wanted. The next day, I told Laura that I had to go to Italy for some final negotiations about purchasing new equipment for my job. She had no objections or questions because I had done similar trips before. The following day, I went to a local travel agency and bought a cheap airline ticket to Madrid, Spain, and even had them book a hotel room in a small town near the border with Portugal. As expected, Laura didn't contact my job to confirm that I had taken 3 days off. I left for the trip, took a local bus from Madrid to the border town, and then crossed into Portugal. But I didn't launder any money. The only thing I did there was take a sightseeing trip around the small town. The next morning, I took the first flight back to Madrid and then home. During the trip, I paid for as much as possible with my personal credit card, which would make it easy to trace my movements if someone wanted to do that in the future. The only thing I could do at the time was check what Laura was doing on our computer. Not much of use so far, only one message from Happy Traveler saying he was sitting alone in a hotel room and wished she were there to keep him company. She didn't reply to him via email, so I checked her cell phone when she took a shower, but all messages were deleted as usual. Then finally, I hit the jackpot. His next email provided useful information. It read, "Hi dear. Sorry I was busy meeting important clients here in the north, far from you, during the days your annoying husband was in Italy. I missed your sweet kisses and warm embrace terribly every evening when I knew you were waiting for me. But I have good news for us. Next Thursday, I'll have the whole day off in town, and the only thing booked so far is a dentist appointment between 9 and 10 a.m. The rest of the day is ours. Just you and me for the entire day, my dear. Please take that day off, at least from 11 a.m., and be with me. It was signed, Chris. Now I knew his name and profession, which gave me a slight hope that she would use email to reply. She did, and wrote, "Dear Chris, of course I'll take the day off after 11 a.m. May I suggest a quiet lunch at your place so people don't see us together in town? When I leave work, I'm sure David still suspects something, so keeping a low profile is wise. I agree that breaking our routine this one time will be good for both of us. I've been thinking about you often and am looking forward to our day together. Love, Laura." To my great pleasure, I managed to find an apartment to rent and paid a year in advance, just in case I ran into any problems with the authorities during the divorce. A salesman named Chris with a common last name living in our town wasn't enough of a clue to find him. It was too common a name and profession, though I suspected he worked for the same company as Laura. However, I knew the date and time, and if I didn't get any further clues, I had a slight chance of tailing her to his place. Nowadays, many people prefer to use cell phones for much of their communication, and it was clear that Laura and her lover Chris did too, because I wasn't able to find out much more on our computer. The day before Laura's expected rendezvous, I had everything ready for my actions. My own and our shared bank accounts were emptied, and the money had disappeared through secret channels away from the open market. A van with dark-tinted windows was rented. To my surprise, Laura acted just as usual on the morning of her big day. No sexy dressing, nothing special with her hair, no visible signs at all that she was about to spend a great day with her lover. I began to hope she had canceled the whole thing. However, I couldn't hide my stress, and Laura had a worried look on her face when she asked, "Are you all right? You don't look well." "What could I say?" I replied. "I'm fine. Just been thinking about some problems I have to fix today, but everything is under control." "I was worried because you look so pale." "No need for that. I'm fine. By the way, it would be great to have lunch together today so we can talk about some important matters." Once again she looked uncomfortable as she replied, "I would love to, but I'm sorry I can't because I'm already booked for an important lunch meeting at work today. Tomorrow will be fine." I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I understand. You must attend to the important matters first." Now even Laura lost the color in her face. Hopefully, she gave a second thought to what she planned to do during the day. Of course, I wasn't far off. The future of our family depended on what she intended to do in the next few hours. I feared it was our last family breakfast together, and that our lunch would be canceled forever. Laura left for work and took Sam with her to preschool. Anna left for school, and I stayed home for a while. Once again, I had taken the day off from my job. At 10:30, I had the van strategically parked outside Laura's office so I could see both her parked car and the staff entrance. Thanks to the dark-tinted windows, no one could see me sitting inside. 5 minutes after 11, she walked out to the parking lot, got into her car, and drove to a residential area just outside the city center, where she parked outside an apartment building and went inside. I followed after her, and saw on the building directory that a Chris Jensen had an apartment on the second floor. I gave her 5 minutes before I called her cell phone. She saw on the caller ID that it was me and answered, "Hi, what's up?" "You, my dear, are my biggest problem." She sounded surprised as she replied, "Me? Have you gone insane?" "No, my dear, but I found your lover boy. Are you at work now, or are you supposed to be there with him? I'm on my way to deal with him. Get dressed and get out of his apartment before I arrive." She sounded worried but said, "What are you talking about?" "Of course, I'm at work. If you're telling the truth, that's good for you. Otherwise, it will be very bad." I ended the call and now stood outside Chris's door with a sledgehammer and a black garbage bag. Just as I expected, about a minute later, a man in his mid-30s opened the door. I was ready with my right fist and hit him hard in the face. That took him by surprise, and he fell back into his apartment. A pale and shocked Laura was standing behind him. I told her, "Get out of here now." Before she could react, I pushed her out of the apartment and locked the door behind her. Now, alone with Chris, I attacked him with a series of punches until he fell to the floor. Under different circumstances, I'm sure this younger man in good shape would have won over me. But now he was caught off guard, and combined with my rage over my lost marriage, it gave me the upper hand. Hitting and kicking him was easy when he was lying still on the floor. I took my sledgehammer and destroyed everything of value in his small, simply furnished apartment. It was clear to me that this wasn't his real home, so I took Chris's cell phone and some papers with his home address and personal information from his briefcase. Laura was still outside the door, ringing the doorbell and screaming, "Don't hurt him! Don't hurt him!" I opened the door and dragged Laura back into the apartment, telling her, "He's yours now. Be with him as much as you want. I don't care about either of you anymore." She got another shock when she saw what I had done to Chris in his apartment. She began to sob. "Please let me explain. Please listen to me, David." I told her to shut up and went out to the van, where I read through Chris's papers and discovered that he worked as a salesman for the same company as Laura, but lived with his family near the national capital. That explained his small apartment in our town. Chris had destroyed my marriage, and as the saying goes, an eye for an eye. I had only one thing left to do. First, I called Laura's parents and asked them to take care of our kids after school because I had to work overtime, and Laura had some personal problems. They promised to do that. Then I switched off my cell phone and went away for a 2-day leisure trip with the rented van. I regret to say that I can't tell you anything about it in this story, because I know that this forum has a large number of readers in the Midwest, probably even those investigating my actions. Innocent people would get into trouble if I said something. Back in my hometown 2 days later, I switched on my phone again and found many messages from Laura. My only reply to her was a text message. "I have filed for divorce, and that is my final decision about our marriage." After that, I spent the rest of the day moving my clothes and other personal things from our house to my new apartment. I left copies of the divorce papers on the kitchen table. Laura's affair with Chris had obviously lasted for several months. If it had been just a one-time fling after the Christmas party, there might have been a slight chance to forgive her. Or if what I told her during our last family breakfast had made her cancel her date with him, it would have saved Chris from my severe beating. The next day, I went to work as usual, and was a bit surprised that Laura didn't call me. My only call regarding Chris came from the police. They wanted to talk with me, and since both Laura and I had a lot to do, we booked a time 3 weeks ahead. After lunch, I called Laura's mother, who told me that the children were at her place for a few days, and that Laura had no objections to the divorce. 3 days later, Laura called me, furious that our net worth was down to 0. She screamed about suing me for that, and for destroying Chris's apartment. I told her that lost money could be replaced, but our lost love and broken family were far worse because they could never be replaced again. Laura wasn't satisfied with that reply. 3 weeks later, my lawyer and I went to the police, and it ended up being a polite conversation. The lawyer had no objections to anything said there. The police accused me of beating Chris so badly that he hadn't been able to work for weeks, and of destroying both his apartment and his house. I denied everything except using self-defense when my wife's angry and desperate lover attacked me when I interrupted their date. I got the impression that the policeman was just doing his job, but didn't put in any extra effort to nail me. Obviously, he had no sympathy for a cheating wife and her lover. I didn't care much because if I were found guilty and sentenced to pay Chris, it wouldn't give him any money. The sentence would only be a document for his legal right to demand payment from me. But if I didn't have any money, that would be his problem, not something the legal system would care about. To my great surprise, Laura called me and suggested a meeting about our children at a restaurant. I went there, and we were able to keep the meeting civil. Laura surprised me by confessing her affair with Chris, which had begun only a few weeks after she started her new job. During a reorganization of the sales department, Laura had assisted Chris as his secretary, and there had almost immediately been a spark between them. A lunch at his small apartment had ended up in his bed, and they had continued their affair, but the chances to be together were limited because Chris rarely stopped by the main office. When Chris's wife couldn't attend the Christmas party, he saw it as a great opportunity to spend almost the entire night with Laura. She had serious doubts but agreed to it after some convincing, which she said was the most foolish mistake of her life. Laura told me that even though she had an affair with Chris, her family and I had always been her first priority. She had never stopped loving me, not even when I started accusing her of cheating. She said they had planned to end the affair after I confronted them, and that she had already planned how to show me she was a faithful wife again. She told me that since Chris's wife had left him, they planned to live together, but she would dump him immediately if I promised to give her another chance. I said I was sorry, but it hurt too much. We agreed that she would have primary custody of the children, but they would be free to see me as often as they wanted. After some hesitation, she asked about the money, and I noticed tears in her eyes when I told her that I had lost everything in stupid speculations and that it was the price she paid for getting rid of me. I told her that I had paid a much higher price for our separation than she had because losing my family was much more significant than losing some money. Once again, Laura promised to get the family back together as soon as I accepted her apology and took her back. She didn't look happy when I told her that I preferred a cheating wife as an ex-wife. Before we parted, I warned her that hiring a lawyer to search for the lost money would cost her a fortune and wouldn't give her anything in return. The following Monday morning at work, my secretary Sarah came in, and I immediately noticed that something was seriously wrong with her. She was wearing sunglasses, and when she took them off, I could see a real black eye on her left side. Her right eye was swollen as if she had cried a lot over the weekend. At first, she refused to tell me anything, but after a few minutes she said, "I'm a single mom now." "What happened?" I asked. "Daniel and I have split up." I was taken by surprise because I had always regarded Sarah and Daniel as the perfect couple. "Why?" I asked. "Because being hit once by your husband is a terrible experience that can be forgiven as a mistake, but when it happens again, it's a bad habit too dangerous to be accepted or forgiven. A man who can hit his wife twice will continue to do it for less reason if she doesn't leave him. Daniel hit me for the second time, and I'm divorcing him. I've always regarded him as a good guy, and I thought you two were the perfect couple. Why has he turned into such a lunatic?" "Because he's jealous. The first time he hit me was when I danced a hot tango with a nice South American guy at a wedding. He was a damn good dancer, but it was just an innocent tango that made Daniel so mad that he hit me. None of the other men had any objections or cared when that handsome guy danced with their wives. I forgave Daniel after a while, but told him that the next time would be the last time, and he promised it would never happen again. But it did, and we're getting divorced." "Why did he hit you this time?" "Because it's my fault that you and Laura split up." I didn't understand anything at all and asked, "How can it be your fault that Laura had an affair with that damn Chris? That's beyond my understanding." "She did it because you and I had an affair." I was so surprised that I shouted, "You and I had what?" "An affair? You and me? When? How?" "No, we didn't. Neither of us knew anything about it, though we were supposed to be the first to know. But Daniel believed it and hit me. I could hardly believe that a good guy like Daniel had turned into such a madman and caused his lovely wife to divorce him. Of course, I had admired Sarah as long as I had known her, but I had never harassed her with any inappropriate comments or suggestions, though I knew I had preferred Sarah over Laura if given the choice. "What could I say?" I asked her. "Why didn't he ask me?" I've never cheated on Laura, though I've had many temptations over the years. Of course, I can't deny that I sometimes envy Daniel for being married to the woman of my dreams. But an innocent dream and a nasty action are two different things. Where did he get such stupid and wrong ideas from, and why did he believe that crap without trying to find out the truth? Some of Daniel's friends heard rumors and told him. Rumors? Why didn't he ask you or me? How could he be so incredibly foolish? "That sounds insane," she said. "He asked with his fists." Sarah tried to laugh and asked, "Now that your dream girl is single, your place or mine?" "Mine will be fine," I replied. "Deal." After an hour, she quietly asked me, "Are you still serious about our date?" I gave her my best smile and replied, "I don't intend to run away because what you offered me today only happens once in a lifetime." "Are you sure I offered you anything?" "No, and I don't expect anything, but a date is a date." "Okay, a date will be a date." Though we joked about our new single lives, Both of us knew that it was a day when our lives could change in many ways. The tension increased, and she took the day off after lunch. After work, I did some shopping before I went to my apartment. I didn't expect her to come, but at 6 p.m., she rang my doorbell with a small overnight bag in her hand. "Just in case you were serious about our date," she said. "I am." It had been a terrible day for her, with a meeting with her lawyer. I suggested she rest while I fixed dinner. After dinner, I comforted her while we sat on the couch, talking about our broken marriages. She asked me several times if I would take Laura back, and I told her every time that it was out of the question. We went to bed early, but I didn't make any moves toward intimacy that evening. To my surprise, she slept well and felt slightly better in the morning. The next weekend, we rented a minivan and went to the nearest zoo with her 2 children and my 2 children. To our great pleasure, everything went much better than we had expected. Now we knew that we could move in together as a family. On Sunday evening, when Sarah had left her kids at her parents' house and I left mine with Laura, we had a romantic dinner at one of the best restaurants in town. Back at my apartment, we began kissing intensely as soon as we closed the door. Then we undressed each other as quickly as we could before falling onto the bed. Since she didn't make any attempts to stop it, we let things happen naturally. After resting, we continued with tender lovemaking in different positions. Sarah told me she was happy because our first time had been wonderful. Real love, tender but intense. Both of us were satisfied, especially me, because Sarah was much more passionate than Laura had been during our last months together. Laura's lawyer found out about my trip to Portugal and tried to use it against me during the divorce proceedings. I got a lot of questions about that trip, but since I told the same simple truth every time, nobody could find anything against me, though Laura's lawyer spent much time investigating my lost money. The divorce ended as expected. Laura got 50% of nothing and a huge debt to her lawyer. During a meeting with Laura about our children, I told her she should have listened to me when I warned her about the pitfalls of chasing lost money. She replied with tears in her eyes, "How could you take all our money? How could you do that to me?" I asked her. "How could you cheat on me? How could you do that to me?" Her reply surprised me. "Because I was an idiot, and that was the worst mistake I ever made in my life." "Does Chris know you regret your affair with him?" "He regrets his part in this mess too. Even he has paid a high price for our affair. But you must be happy now that you have the woman you love. Please remember that I gave you a fair choice during our last breakfast as a family, and you preferred going to Chris instead of having lunch with me. That was the worst mistake of my life. I lost the man I love. But though Chris and I are the losers in this mess, we're making the best of the situation." "Are you happy?" I replied. "Yes, I'm very happy with Sarah. But neither she nor I chose to be divorced. We both would have preferred to have our children grow up in a home with both parents. We're happy to have each other, and we're doing our best to make it work." Laura and Chris bought my old house for a high price. In fact, they took over all the loans, which gave them much higher monthly expenses than Laura and I had during our time there. Sarah's ex-husband bought her out from their house for a fair price, and she invested that money in a new house where she and I moved in together. The police didn't ask me any further questions about the damages to Chris's house near the Capitol. Such matters probably weren't a big deal there, and at that time, the police were short-staffed and had difficulties cooperating between different districts, which didn't work well. I heard rumors that the house had been some kind of sole property for Chris's wife, and she had taken most of the insurance money. However, I was sentenced to 2 months in a white-collar jail and ordered to pay Chris compensation for the beating and for the damages in his small apartment in our town. I never paid him anything and have no intentions of paying him either. Of course, I promised to pay him as soon as I got some money, but as long as I don't have any, the authorities can't do anything to help him collect from me. Sarah and I quit our old jobs, which are now done by Sarah's new consulting company where I work part-time. I drive a company car and live as a lodger in her house. It's a good arrangement for both of us. Laura hasn't given up her search for the lost money. One evening, she invited Sarah to a pub to talk about the children, and after several drinks, she began asking Sarah about the money. But Sarah could only tell her the truth. She neither knew about any money, nor cared about it because, to her, I was the best thing she had ever gotten in her whole life. Sarah and I have always worked well together, And now we've even created a very good family relationship with lots of fun together, and a great intimate life. My children like Sarah, and her children like me. Things were going well until I heard rumors about Daniel bragging in town about winning Sarah back. I knew he had been having weekly sessions with an expensive therapist, and had bragged that he was cured of his issues. I didn't say anything about it to Sarah because I decided to let her make her own decisions on the matter. Sarah's ex-in-laws couldn't accept that she had left their son, and made several serious attempts to get her back with Daniel. They used to call her at least once a week, and had promised her all kinds of benefits, such as a new car or an expensive holiday trip, if she reconciled with Daniel. One evening, Sarah had a worried look on her face when she told me she was invited to Daniel's younger sister's wedding. She said, "I'd like to go, but if you have any objections, I'll stay home." Why should I have any objections? Because I'm afraid Daniel's parents will try hard to get us back together, and a romantic event like a wedding will be a great opportunity for them to persuade me, so I ought to stay away from the wedding. But I was really close to his sister, so I'd like to go if it's okay with you. The only thing I could say was, "You're an adult. If you want to go, then go. It would be fun to see her on her big day, especially if there are problems in her relationship and this wedding is their last attempt to save it." "So, are you really sure you don't have any objections?" "No, I can't see any reason to object. One good reason could be that I suspect there will be some drinking, and I'll have to stay overnight." "Aren't you worried about that?" "Now, why should I be? As I said before, you're an adult who can take care of yourself. I love you. I love you too." Daniel's hometown was about 40 miles from ours, and Sarah left early on Saturday, expecting to return sometime on Sunday. I hadn't asked her about any details because it was up to her to decide what she wanted to do. We decided to minimize phone calls to just one, where she told me she had arrived safely, and I wished her a good time at the wedding. She gave me a hug and kiss before she left. Of course, that Saturday was an important day for me, and I had feared it much more than I wanted to show. Anything could happen during her trip, and I knew she would be under heavy pressure from Daniel, his parents, and their friends. I had told Sarah that she was an adult who could take care of herself, and nothing made me think otherwise. Laura had the kids, so I spent most of the day working and went out for dinner and some drinks with some acquaintances at a pub, but didn't stay long. I had bought a comedy on DVD, which I watched before going to bed. To my great surprise, Sarah was back home by 10 on Sunday morning. She gave me a warm hug and told me to follow her to the bedroom for more hugs. Then she stripped, fell onto the bed, dragged me on top of her, and whispered in my ear, "Oh, I love you so much. Make love to me." I followed her lead a few seconds later. Afterwards, she asked me, "Did I shock you by coming home all worked up?" "You gave me a very pleasant surprise. I love you so much for trusting me and letting me go to the wedding, even though you knew there would be serious attempts to get me back with Daniel. I knew that, but I was sure you could handle it." Yes, I did. She then told me that several relatives were staying overnight at Daniel's parents' house, so they had planned for Daniel and her to share a small room with only one bed. The bride had given Sarah a heads up about this, though Sarah herself had expected something like that and had booked a hotel room instead. She left the party when the drunken suggestions about taking Daniel back became too common to be funny. She skipped the Sunday dinner with Daniel's family and left the hotel after an early breakfast. One thing was for sure. Sarah and I had a very strong relationship. Last week, when Laura and I met at a cafe to plan the next few months for our kids, I got the impression that she looked more unhappy than usual. When I asked if she and Chris were having problems, she said, "Yes, we are." I wouldn't hesitate for a second to say yes if you asked me to come back to you. I wasn't surprised because the kids had told me some stories about Laura and Chris's disagreements. I asked her, "He cheated on his wife, and I'm sure you weren't his only fling during that time. Is he cheating on you now?" She began to cry and sobbed. "Yes, I think so." After discovering the truth about Laura's affair, David's world crumbled, but he fought back with a plan that changed everything.